Good evening, Western Standard viewers, and welcome to Hannaford, a weekly politics show. Joining me tonight is somebody who may be familiar to Western Standard readers from the days when the Standard was a print product. That would be Andrea Mrozek, who is very much still writing, and with her colleague Peter John Mitchell has just published a book. Good to see you again, Andrea.
Thanks so much for having me on, Nigel.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Andrea, I've always recalled you as the investigative reporter who broke the story in the Western Standard that sex-selective abortion was widely practiced in BC among, do you remember this?
I do, yes.
We have it framed on the wall. Yes, it was widely practiced in BC among immigrant communities who wanted sons, not daughters. I'm making light of it in this interview, but of course it was an extremely serious story. I think one of the landmark pieces of journalism in 2006. Anyway, these days you're doing great work with the Christian think tank Cardis in Ottawa. And in fact, your job is to research marriage. And that's a personal project for you as well, isn't it?
You made it sound like I got married as a research experiment, but yes, indeed. 10 years of research into my own personal marriage, I suppose. Got married quite late in life, actually, in keeping with today's Canadian statistics. So I'm part of that cohort.
Way to go, Andrea. In a few moments, I'm going to give you a chance to tell viewers where to get your book. But first, marriage has been around for a while, hasn't it? And yet you've called your book I ... do ? That sounds like it might be a new angle. What is it?
Really, I mean, the question mark, I'm glad you picked up on that. It's an important part of the title because today we have a culture and a younger generation who view marriage as maybe nice, but unnecessary, and certainly not. It's something that's met with, I think, a fair amount of ambivalence as well. And so we put the question mark in to reflect that cultural trend, but at the same time to indicate that we would like people to start asking questions afresh about the institution of marriage, which over time in research I've come to see as far more critically important, not just for ourselves, but for the culture and the communities that we live in. So the question mark reflects that ambivalence and the fact that we view marriage as kind of negotiable, not necessary, and also the fact that we are encouraging readers, young and old, to reconsider or reimagine what they think they know about marriage.
Really? Okay. Well, to me, there's always seemed to be a contractual element to marriage. And, you know, the one partner does something for the other partner and the other partner does something back. And to that point, we've just published a story from BC. We have a reporter in BC, young Jared Jager, and he reports that a child advocacy group says nearly half the children living in poverty, as they define it, are actually in single-parent households, and that's likely to be single mothers, far more likely than to be single fathers. So when the man-woman contract breaks down, the one where a man basically promises to support a woman and his family, and in return, she looks after him and his needs. When that breaks down, the children suffer. And then, I notice the authors of the poverty study we're talking about do this. There's an appeal to the state to help.
Yeah.
So women end up looking to the state for what they should be looking for from a husband. As a society, where does that take us?
So I think you've just said a lot, of course, but one angle of that I'll immediately comment on is that, yes, we do see less income, less financial resources in single parenting families, and marriage remains a source of stability for longevity, and that's good for the kids as it is for the parents. But when you see stories like that arise, and they'll often talk about many aspects of poverty eradication that are very valuable, whether it's turning to the state or to the charitable sector. But the one thing no one ever talks about is the obvious family angle, which is foundational to poverty eradication. So I come to this question of marriage also with an eye to helping those who are poor, helping those who are living on the margins. And what we see in marriage culture today is that there's a marriage divide, and wealthier people continue to get married, where less wealthy, lower income people, the marriage rates are dropping off even more than the population as a whole. I think that speaks to the idea of luxury beliefs, which is a term coined by a scholar, Robert Henderson. He was raised virtually without family in the foster care system in the United States, but those stories also exist here in Canada. So when we're thinking about some of the pressing social issues that we face as a society, be it child poverty, be it rising rates of social isolation or loneliness, the family angle most often goes totally unmentioned. And so part of the book's effort is to bring the family angle back in, not as a form of judgment or saying everybody must be married, but as a simple research question that we see benefits from this. So why not talk about the institution of marriage?
So, Andrea, look, you said just a moment ago that for wealthier people, they tend to carry on, get married, and have families, but that marriage rates are dropping off among the less prosperous.
Mm-hmm.
Which is the cause and which is the effect?
Yeah.
Go ahead. I think you know what I'm getting at.
Yeah, which is cause and effect. And I think there is different theories on that. And you can see factors coming together in a circular way, and that it's a complex issue. And so you might have simple choices amongst people who are wealthier towards getting married, or they're more marriageable. You have the education factor mixed in there, but ultimately we want to see a society where we treat people equally, regardless of education level, regardless of income level, that everybody sees marriage as an opportunity for their own family stability, regardless of how we get into the place of seeing less educated or lower income North Americans. Really, this is across North America, we see that trend line. We want marriage to be an accessible option to everybody. I'm not sure if your viewers are aware, but there's something called the success sequence. And that in the research points to the idea that...
What is it? What did you just say? There's something called a what?
The success sequence, which virtually eliminates the probability that you're ever going to live in poverty. And that is, the sequence is a simple one. You finish your schooling first, you get married next, and you have kids after that, in that order. And so that, I guess, gets at the poverty angle again, as well as some of the differences between high income and low income in marriage rates. But really, we want marriage to be there for everybody, and not just a certain segment of society.
So in the course of your researches, you must have observed that in this day and age, unlike maybe 20 or 50 years ago, often you have the wife earning, or has the ability to earn more than the husband. So if the woman is earning more than the man, does that tend to make men less anxious to be married? Is it kind of a little power thing going on there that deters them?
I don't know about that, Nigel, but I do think there is the sense today that we have, which I would argue is wrongheaded, that we just don't need marriage as much anymore. And that may have something to do with income generation on the part of women and rising opportunities in the workforce. Whether we're in the 2000s or back in the 50s, I think the same thing is at play, which is to say that marriage acts as a future-oriented institution in your life, and it contains the love of partners in it. And that means that we can view marriage more as like an adventure, Tolkien-style adventure, rather than a rom-com. And you can have a lot of variation in the ways that people live out their marriages. But it is still something that is future-oriented and holding families together, maintaining stability at a greater rate than, say, merely living together. And it remains important regardless of the ways in which people negotiate particular aspects of their married lives. I do know there's research available to suggest that women still, even today, with all of our earning potential and all of the career opportunities available, which are a good thing, but even today, women would like men who also earn as much or more than they do. I don't think this is a deal breaker for marriage as an institution. Really, we're getting at that foundational idea of marriage and how it undergirds our social stability and helps us in raising our families and having a source of long-term, like thinking about the long term in our lives, looking towards the future.
I think what you just talked about there is something you refer to in the book as a life script, this sequential, I think you said you finish school and then you get married and then you have children, do it in that order and things go better. Now, I guess one of the questions would be is if you are wanting to do that, do you have to be married? You could still finish school, start a relationship, and have children. And I know there's a whole lot of people who are out there living in that situation who would say, well, and it works fine for us, but you're saying marriage is better. What's the difference?
Yeah, and the answer there is going to be a bit dry, and certainly we all have those examples in our lives and perhaps living them ourselves, but the data on the nature of cohabitation just shows that it works itself in the aggregate, in spite of the wonderful examples of people who look exactly as if they're married, raising children happily, and the data is just not the same. And so I think we can intuitively understand that both can coexist, both can be true, but in the aggregate, people who end up living together have come into that relationship for different reasons. And some of them are very intentional, and others slide into a living together arrangement by accident. Maybe they have a child by accident. The intention there is not quite the same. The intentionality, the purposeful nature of it may not be the same. That's actually an advantage of cohabitation. If you want to get in and out quickly, it's really not the same type of commitment as marriage might be, in spite of many beautiful examples that we might see around us. So the answer is a bit dry there. Simply say that the data doesn't bear out that they're exactly the same. And so on heated issues, and family and marriage can be quite heated because they are so personal. Oftentimes I'm just like, what does the data show us? And the data tells us it's not the same thing.
Well, being pretty ancient as I am, I grew up in an era when the joke was that men didn't want to get married, but women did. And it seems to me that just to take that seriously for a moment, for cohabitation without marriage seems, whatever the law says, but seems to a man a kind of lower level of commitment. And I think that's what you just said. And so it makes it more attractive. Now, is that perhaps at the root of why the data, and I'm aware of the data you're talking about, it's very clear the cohabitation, the less successful outcome. But is it the fact that men go into this thing thinking they can get out of it a bit easier?
In the cohabitation side of the thing,
Yeah, I mean, the law says otherwise, but what men often think stupid things.
As you were talking, I thought of some of the feminist literature on marriage, which has really panned marriage. Second wave feminism and beyond has almost without exception said that marriage is terrible for women, a bit of a prison for women, and that it constrains women. But that conversation is pushed out the side, saying that what actually marriage can do is constrain men and limit their options in such a way that is beneficial to the woman and perhaps mother of a child and family, also beneficial to men. But I often I like to bring up that point of marriage as a constraint on men, acting as a constraint in a way that we haven't had that conversation, because we're immersed very much in this in a lot of the feminist literature on marriage, declaring that it's bad for women. So we have a section in the book talking about the ways in which marriage is beneficial to men alone, and then to women alone, then to children, as if they were separate. But really that amounts to benefits for everybody, even if it comes through constraints. So endless choices don't always amount to greater happiness.
So that, hence all the jokes about marriage. Everybody grumbles, and yet so many of us still do it. Look, putting this together, Andrea, you're saying that society at large has an interest in not only marriage, but in stable marriage. And yet that can sound pretty harsh to people who have never been married but wish to, and to those for whom it's not even something they want.
Mm-hmm.
Should everybody be married?
No, absolutely not. It's not a book that compels forced marriage. The question mark remains at the beginning. And we hope that this book is a soft entry point into discussing the ways in which marriage matters without compelling anyone to a particular course of action. But because family is so personal and it's a place of great joy, but also our deepest wounds, oftentimes we can't even have the conversations that engender thinking on the subject of marriage. So we haven't even begun to touch on how we consider marriage today as a largely romantic expression. There's a lot of emotion invested in it. We call it the soulmate model of marriage. Our hope is to return to a bit of a more robust model, which is more institutional. And yet, at the same time, to return to your question, this is not to say that those who are not married are living lesser lives. I myself got married very, very late in life, and feel that the 40 years leading up to that were quite meaningful and fruitful, as it were. So it's a book written without judgment. And if I may toot our own horn just a little bit, we were concerned about the judgment factor in writing it. And one person who's read it is a divorced mother of a 14-year-old. And her own marriage had ended for good reason, and it had been very traumatic for the family. And this divorced mother was going to be giving her 14-year-old daughter our book so that she could encounter some of these more academic arguments around marriage with a lot of the heat taken out. So I felt quite proud of that, to understand that it was a book that spoke to people who have themselves suffered in their marriages.
Well, I bet you did feel proud of that. Well done. That's a great compliment. And, you know, if anybody could actually take the subject of marriage and set it on one side and look at it from all angles and come up with a good read, that would be you. So really, really good to hear your comments about it. Andrea, how do people get a copy? And can they get it in time for Christmas?
Oh, they can indeed. Yes, just through Amazon is the easiest way. I work for Cardis, and so it's up at cardis.ca as well, but the easiest way is Amazon.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you know, for all the times that I've talked to people who've written books and, get it on Amazon. We really should be tapping up Amazon for some advertising, but there it is. And what a great thing. Speaking as a taxpayer, I sure hope the marriages will last, because when marriages last, they don't go back and become a charge to the state. And that's when I go back into that contractual argument. But anyway, you have done a wonderful job here in taking this subject apart and putting it back together again. Bless your heart. And it's great to see you, Andrea.
Well, thanks so much. It's good to reconnect with the Western Standard.
What's your next project?
Oh, gosh, promoting this one.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
consider it well done. We've been privileged to have with us, Western Standard viewers, Andrea Mrozek. She works for Cardis in Ottawa, and it is her job to study and be well informed about marriage. And she has put it out in a book, and she tells us you can get it via Amazon. It's called Do ? And by Andrea Mrozek. Thanks again for coming on, Andrea. And for the Western Standard, I'm Nigel Hannaford.